This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Today's episode is part of a series we're producing together with Israel in Depth, the podcast of the Yunus and Soraya Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at UCLA. The director of the center, Dov Waxman, is joining me again as co-host. He is Professor of Political Science and the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Chair in Israel Studies at UCLA. Hi, Dov. Welcome back.
Hello, Gilad. Happy to be back.
Our guest today is the former CEO of Breaking the Silence, an organization of veteran IDF soldiers working to end the occupation of the Palestinian territories. Her memoir, Who Do You Think You Are?, was published in Hebrew in 2022, and she's now with us here in the studio. Yuri Novak, hello, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you.
So the book is a personal, sometimes very personal, reflection on your 5-year tenure as the director of one of the most reviled and demonized NGOs in modern Israeli history. Now, taking into account some of the experiences that you share, I'd expect you to want to be left alone and completely disappear from the public eye. But you did choose, however, to write this book and return to the public eye. Why?
I guess I wanted to get out of the public eye, as you call it, or get out of the public eye is a good way to put it, but I think also to get out of here, like to get out of this place. When I finished my term in Breaking the Silence as a director, it was mid-2017. And as you said, it was after 5 years of leading this organization, 5 years in which it was the peak of what today we know to call a crackdown on civil society and human rights organizations in Israel. And Breaking the Silence, we found ourselves really in the midst of that. So we were, as with other organizations, but we were the main target of this crackdown. So politically, it was very complex time, and personally, it was super complex for myself. First of all, it was scary to be here. It turned very quick to be a dangerous thing.
You mean for your personal safety?
Yeah, for me and for others. Our faces were out there, and the incitement was very high. But also politically, it was very confusing time for me. Israel is the only home I have. And to get into a place where you cannot feel safe physically, but not only physically, at your home, you don't recognize the place anymore. For me, it was too much to bear. And then I decided to leave, actually. Like, it wasn't a decision to leave, but I had to get out of here.
To get away, and writing the book was, in a way to come back.
It turned out to be a way to come back. I didn't plan it that way.
So, I wonder, were you surprised by the vitriol, the harassment, the kind of what was unleashed upon you personally and on Breaking the Silence? Did you anticipate any of that, or did it come as a complete shock? And kind of looking back, why were you surprised by it, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask these days, right? Because and it's really interesting to think about it, to look back at this time.
Yeah, how naive we all were.
Yeah, but we were. We're talking about like this. This attack, this crackdown started. I point the starting point at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. It's time where it was a governmental attack combined with civil organizations who are very connected to the government and they're still around, like Im Tirtzu and Ad Kan and others. But back then we didn't know that. And, let's take just for example, a massive media reports, like in various outlets, almost every day for a few months, defying breaking the silence. Mostly lies, but some of it is like half-truth or out of context truth or whatever. These days, we would call it fake news. But back then, we didn't have this term. It's a year before Trump. Nobody knew the concept of fake news. So it was we're talking only about like 5 and 6 years ago, but it's like we were the pioneer in a way. We were the pioneer. We weren't the pioneer because it happened before us.
Yeah, it's funny that you write that when you took over in 2012, people thought that Breaking the Silence was some sort of an organization that's meant to fight domestic violence. I mean, so obscure was your work to the general public.
Yeah, it was a small human rights organization. Some people knew about it, but most people, when I walked around and said I'm a director of Breaking the Silence, most people didn't know what it was about. It was only with these attacks, massive attacks, that we came to be something known. And it happened basically overnight, and I think that referred to your question, because part of the surprise is, and I think this is part of the mechanism that works out, the political mechanism that works out, and we see it in other arenas as well. It's not only, this mechanism not works only towards human rights organization, right? They moved on, but to the legal system, to the courts, to the media, to whatever. But it happened very fast, and then it caught you by surprise in a way.
Why do you think, looking back, I think you're right that things did change. There was a shift beginning maybe around 2015. Why do you think that was? Why do you think in the past, human rights organizations in Israel, which may have been kind of an annoyance to certain groups, but were basically tolerated, you have this new kind of discourse which really identifies Israeli Jews for the first time in many ways as internal enemies, as threats to the nation.
Right.
What was driving that?
I think maybe two things. First, it is part. I still see it as part of a more global phenomena. Right. It's not something that happened only here. We see it in other places. In some countries, it's clear. Hungary, Poland, in other countries, it takes different shapes. The U.S., other places around the world, but states that hold a ethos of democracy, and mostly the elite, which I consider myself part of. Right, I grew up here as a patriot. As a Zionist, as someone who is really the
salt of the earth.
Yeah, the DNA of this place. This is how I thought about myself, and we see this process of authoritarian, like these countries that been considered democracies, each with its own problem of none of it was never perfect democracy, but turning or moving towards authoritarian sort of regime, and this is the process. I think that it happened. Like we see it again and again, but that's in general. And I think in our case, in the Israeli-Palestinian case, it's not contradicting to what I just said. Just we can see also a specific characteristic of this place, and the roots for it were there to begin with. So when and goes back to the surprise, when I started running Breaking the Silence, my idea was, I was quite knowledgeable and political person. I finished 2 degrees in law. I was involved in some political activity before. And I thought I'm coming to run a human rights organization in a democratic setting. And I had all kind of assumptions that comes with it, right? That I will have this freedom of speech, that I can raise money, that I can count on the police to protect me, whatever, all kind of things that you think about when you think about democracy. And it took me a while. I think what happened to me in Breaking the Silence was the starting point of a process for me to understand that we are very far from being a democracy. And it's been like that maybe forever. Like, this place is not a democracy and nothing close to a democracy. So democracy is not a 1 or 0, right? It's always kind of a spectrum. But we are to realize that first of all, to shift my thinking from thinking about the state to thinking about what sort of a regime, what sort of system is working here. And then understand that this system holds values that are undemocratic at its basis, like Jewish superiority. And the only reasonable thing that will happen down the road is that these values will take over, or at least that we should expect it if we cannot manage it.
Did this experience with Breaking the Silence make you less of a Zionist, less of a patriot? Do you look back and saying, with some regret on having given 5 years of your life to the IDF? I mean, what you're expecting? All these realizations were these realizations about your place in Israel complemented it?
It's not only the experience of Breaking the Silence and the fact that the state, the regime that was supposed to protect me, that's what I thought, turned against me very quickly. That was the trigger for me to start and explore. I didn't understand those things back then. It took me a while. I think I spent quite a lot of time in South Africa. It helped me a lot to shape my thinking and to realize what it means and what are the mechanisms that works within a state that is non-democratic but call itself democratic. So it's a mental process that I had to go through. And if I'm still struggling with the definitions. So that's the truth. But I understood something about this place, which was hard to understand. Again, because first of all, it's my only home. I don't have another home. And I love this place. And Hebrew is my only language, as you can hear. But to see the truth about something, I think, even if it's hard, it is sometimes makes it a bit easier, even to live in it. So I don't know, patriotic, I still love this place. But I see it, I think, as it is. And it is a very, very, very problematic setting to live in.
So I want to ask you talked about, in a sense, a kind of sense of betrayal almost, in terms of realizing that the state that you had sacrificed for, that you had committed yourself to, turned against you in some way. I wonder whether, talking about Israeli society now, there was a similar sense of, this expectation. The premise, in a way, of Breaking the Silence was that if you can hold up this mirror to Israeli society, if you can bring about, if you can open up the cupboard of skeletons and talk honestly and openly about what soldiers were doing in the West Bank, then this would shock Israelis and change their attitudes. But that hasn't really happened. In fact, some of the more highly publicized incidents of Israeli military brutality, I think of the Alor Azaria affair, actually, in a way, had the opposite impact. How does that make you understand the society that you're living in? Yeah,
so I think some of these, I mean, you said it right. That was the premise, the assumption that my working assumption while in Breaking the Silence.
That was the whole organization's working assumption, wasn't it?
Yes. That it will make a change. That people will. They just need to see it, and then some of them, not all of them, but some of them who share our values will shift their mind. I think it is still true to some extent, but we're working against a very super strong and forces, which is fear, and that I think I didn't take into account enough. I mean, I don't think Israelis are not bad. We're not worse or better than other nations. It's not. I don't think anyone, there is no nation a group of people that are bad in essence. But I think we live in a story, in a narrative that it works to scare us, to make us. I grew up to know that the only way I can live in this space is by being strong, as a state. A military strength is something that the only thing that will keep us here, basically. Did someone told it to me? Probably yes, but it's also just something that you know when you live here. That's the reason why when I was 18, I didn't thought twice whether to go or not, enlisted or not. It wasn't a real question. It was just something that you do because you have to. That's to serve your society. And just think of that. And I say, if you live in this atmosphere, so it's the fear is instilled in you from since you're a child, and building on this fear is very easy to manipulate and to keep. Not even by intention, maybe manipulate is not the right word. Some of it is to manipulate, but some of it is just to work within this narrative. And it's very, very hard to speak against it. When you speak against it, sometimes you sound like a naive or get out of here. What are you talking about? And sometimes you can get attacked as a traitor. But this is one of the most sophisticated tools that this kind of regime has, that they narrowing your imagination of what this place can be. And again, going back to South Africa, you know that in South Africa, I talked to people. They also, during the apartheid years, every white person had to enlist. They had a compulsory service, and they fought wars with almost every country around them. So they enlisted to the army and were sent to war that were still going on. And people told me, not many people want to talk about their army service back then. It's not something that you are proud of or that you talk about today. But when I asked, people told me, well, it was just something that we had to do. It was to serve our country, and it was our safety. Now, all those wars ended at the day the apartheid end, right? They didn't went into the 90s. So I'm just saying it's not exactly the same situation, but you see how a society is built around this ethos of militarism and of fear, and I think that's the main thing that runs us these days.
I want to go back to what you talked about earlier about the crackdown on Breaking the Silence and other civil society organizations. It felt like at the time, still does today, that this crackdown targeted Breaking the Silence more than other organizations. That really you were at the forefront of the government and campaign and the other affiliated organizations. Do you agree? I mean, or was it just my subjective impression? And if so, why do you think is it Breaking the Silence specifically that was on everybody's in between everybody's crosshairs?
I agree. I mean, it's a fact. It's not, and I'm not sure. I used to think that the reason is. And maybe it's true that the attack was aimed at not towards what I call the DNA of the Zionist left. It was much easier, but much less with much less impact to attack more groups that hold more radical or anarchist stance. And Breaking the Silence was still organization of soldiers who doesn't oppose the military, who doesn't... Organization of Israelis who are proud to be Israelis. And to attack, I think to aim your attack there, knowingly or not knowingly, it's not necessarily was intentional, but the effect of it was massive. It really broke down a whole camp. And I think the collapse of what we call the Zionist left, the liberal Zionists in Israel, which we saw in the last few years happening also in the political arena, right? With Meretz disappearing, with the Labour Party
almost
disappearing. So it's a political camp that I think Breaking the Silence was very much identified with. And we saw the cracks immediately. I mean, once the attacks started, many people from within what we thought will be our supporters start to took sides. So the cracks were there, and others turned to we got more support from others. So it was a complex situation. But you saw the cracks, and I think that was the main reason.
I mean, it seems to me Breaking the Silence particularly challenges, one of the most cherished institutions in Israeli life, which is the IDF. And in addition to, the fear that you talked about, there's also the pride that people take in, the IDF being perceived as the most moral army in the world. There's this a kind of its centrality in Israeli identity, I think, particularly evokes anything that challenges that heroic myth is going to provoke a very fierce backlash. I want to ask you because in talking about the Breaking the Silence instance as embedded in the left, in the Zionist left, in the Israeli Jewish left, your book and your own life story in many ways covers kind of much of the trajectory of the Israeli left, from the support for the Oslo peace process, the belief in the peace process, peace activism, to human rights activism, this shift away from kind of focusing on the peace process to, okay, now we're going to focus on human rights. Where do you think the left is today? I mean, has this, is there now a realization or a reckoning with maybe the limits of human rights activism in this conflict?
I think the left today is in a crossroad, actually, or in a space where we need to ask ourselves some really serious questions. Not only in Israel, by the way, but also but definitely here. Today, we don't have, to be sincere, we don't have an alternative paradigm, acceptable paradigm that we share in a wide. I mean, there are few offers on the table, but like a real paradigm, political paradigm to think about this space that is not this Zionist left two-state partition paradigm that we held and that I personally held. I grew up to know, as a leftist, I grew up to know that partition is the solution. Today, I think that partition is I would say partition is already an apartheid. Like, we cannot just split this place in a way that's comfortable for us, the Jews, in order to keep us a democracy on part of the territory. It's not working that way. And
can you elaborate on that? Why is separation? I mean, separation also entails giving the Palestinian statehood their own rights, making them masters in their own home. Why is that apartheid?
It depends who decide upon this separation and upon this partition. That's the point. So I said before that I had this shift moving from thinking about the state of Israel, which in my mind was always within the 67 borders, right? So the green line is the border of this state, this Israeli state, to think about the regime. And once I think about the regime, about the system that controlled the area, I have to think about the West Bank and about the Gaza Strip as well. And then, and the next step was to realize that this green line is very comfortable for people like me who believe in democracy. And then we can say, okay, so here is the line. That way we can keep a majority of Jews. And this is things that are said like vocally. I'm not revealing anything, right? To keep a majority of Jews in one side of this line, and we'll call it a democracy, even though we have this law that help us bring more Jews to immigrate into Israel, and we used it, Chok HaShvut, right?
The law of return.
Law of return, yeah. And millions of Jews came over. So we'll keep this democracy within the lines that democracy for everyone, but with a Jewish majority. I mean, that's very comfortable for us. A real democracy was to think about all the people that live here between the Jordan River and the sea, and to ask everyone how they want to live.
So not a Jewish state or not a Jewish regime?
Not a Jewish regime, unless all the people around, like this 14 million around that live around
between the river and the sea.
Yeah, will decide how they want to split this land. It's not ours to decide. That's what I think. That's what I mean. And in that sense, when the Jews decide how they want to split it, that is apartheid. That is exactly the concept of apartheid, of what in South Africa was called grand apartheid. There was the petty apartheid, which was the separation on the beaches and the benchmarks and the ugly apartheid that you saw within the white areas. But there was this grand apartheid, and the grand apartheid was the concept of building homelands, giving territories to different tribes, and then to have a democracy within the space that was left for whites. And I started this line of thinking when I heard white South African told me that back then in the 70s and the 80s, they were sure they were the only democracy in Africa. They were sure because all around it was a mess. All Africa was a mess, and they saw themselves as democracy, and that is why I'm saying, like, yeah.
So you saw many similarities between the South African experience of apartheid and the Israeli reality. I wonder, during your time in South Africa, you also saw differences between the two. I mean, nowadays the apartheid analogy is much debated. Obviously, there's also the international law, which rules out apartheid, which is somewhat different than the South African analogy. But just on the analogy, not specifically on the law of apartheid, did you also see the Israeli context as different in some ways, or did you really mostly see the similarities?
It's different in many ways. I can start counting, but we're in a different time. We're in a different time, a different continent. It's a different circumstances. The numbers are different. I can go on. The similarities that I saw were mostly mentally. When I got there to South Africa, I didn't plan to, but and it even surprised me. But I was very attracted to the Afrikaners, to the white, the white Afrikaners who controlled the apartheid regime and set the apartheid regime and controlled it. And it took me a while to understand why, but I guess that. First of all, their story, like their story is remarkably reminding of us, like the narrative of first destruction and being under like a nation that was built from the ashes, and but more than that, they saw South Africa as their homeland and their only homeland. It's not like colonial people that had a place to go to. They have been there since the 17th century. That was their home. But their history and the turn of event turned them into a very, very cruel society, and completely blind to what they are doing, and completely ignorant to other options of living. And that is something that I could relate very much. So the similarities that I see are mostly mental in what this kind of regime is doing to your mind when you are under it, even as a privilege, on the privilege side.
I want to ask you about breaking the silence as a woman. I mean, this is an elephant in the room in a way. I mean, we're talking about it, but the fact that you're a woman played a big role in it, not just for you personally, being a woman running an organization of soldiers that is inherently, just like the army itself, very masculine, but also the fact that you had not served in the West Bank. You did not see the occupation firsthand. What was it like for you? And also for the organization, having a woman with your profile at the helm?
So I didn't serve at the West Bank, it's true. I served in the Air Force, so inside the bases in Israel, but I served during the Second Intifada, and today I know that, I took part in whatever went on there. It's not something that I'm proud of today, but so it's not that the military sentiment, vibe, atmosphere was very far away from me, even as a woman. It's a sentiment that I grew up in. And I also grew up to kind of admire it and to feel safe around it, like this vibe of soldiers, of brave men around me. I'm saying all this because I think it took me really a long time, and I saw myself as a feminist back then, but today I don't think I was. I think I came into Breaking the Silence with a very twisted conception, twisted but very normal here, a conception about what is to be brave, what keeps you safe, what makes you feel safe. It's not even a conception; it's a feeling. It's something that really is inside you, and that was also the way I ran Breaking the Silence. So I ran it like a military unit, especially when all this mess started. We were like, it was intense. I was much younger, and I didn't have family. It was like we were there. We were fighting. I don't like it. I'm talking about it. I'm not proud of it. It's just something that I think, in a way, we played the game, and we played the game, and I take first and foremost responsibility for it. We played the game, exactly the game that today I want to change. We kind of play along with the same tools. I don't think we won. I think we gave quite a fight. But that was also the reason that it kept going, because we didn't let go. There was someone to fight with, so the fight went on for months. But it wasn't, I think, for your question, the organization, I felt quite comfortable with me because I fitted very well to this ethos.
I wonder, though, do you think it made a difference, in terms of the harassment and the threats and the vitriol directed against you? Looking back, do you think that was related in part to being a woman leading an organization? I think about Naomi Chazan, for example, also a target. Is there, the kind of
the former head of the
former head of the New Israel Fund,
New Israel
who
Fund, yeah.
was also depicted, I think, by Im Tirtzu with, as a devil. And this can often seem that women in public life can particularly become targets for vitriol, for misogyny. Do you think that made a difference in the way in which you were treated?
I think so. I cannot be sure, but I think so. I think there is something, I talked before about within the organization. And there I think I fit it fine. But in the public eye, I think there is something even more annoying when a woman come into this arena and play along. So it's a gentle, it's like a thin line, because nobody wants to be seen as a chauvinist but on that, I think it's annoyed a lot of people, and it attracts much more fire.
And you're challenging a male-dominated institution in the IDF, which is in many ways something particularly related to, I suppose, Israeli masculinity.
Yes, and I have to say, a few times I remember media interviews that I remember one in particular with Ronnie Daniel. Ronnie Daniel was a reporter. He passed away, but he was a reporter, like the military reporter of the most known military reporter and the one who knows the best and blah, blah, blah. And I sat there and we were arguing about something that, like a practice that took place in the West Bank about entering houses, Almanat Kasha. Anyway, we were arguing about it, and he told me it never happens. And I know something better than he does about the practice of the IDF. So I think part of what we did in Breaking the Silence, and this is part of the strength of human rights organization all over, that once you do a very you do your job good and you have the information and you can hold it, I think it's also like a tool you use, and that was surprising also, I think, for to go into this discussion, but no, actually I know more about what's going on in the West Bank and Gaza than you guys, because we researched it and we talked to the soldiers, and I have information that you don't have, and that it blew the mind of some people.
Yuli, looking back, I mean, to the 5 years at Breaking the Silence, with all the harassment you had to endure, the death threats, and also the fact that it did very little. You did not end the occupation, or wouldn't get anywhere near there. Was it all worth it?
I don't think I came to Breaking the Silence with the idea that we are going, in my term, the occupation is going to end. I don't think that was the goal. So, and I don't think political struggles like this are. It's a long-term struggle, right? So it's very hard to judge. I mean, you can't judge specific decisions whether they've been right or wrong strategically looking back. That's fine. And I don't think we're successful strategically. We as a camp, I don't think people who share my views, my values, we're losing big time right now. That's a fact. But again, when you fight over these kind of things, like to change the political system of a place, such a fundamental elements of a political system of the place you live in, it's a long fight. So if it's worth it, I don't know. I don't think. Personally, I don't feel I have any other choice. Like, what else can I do?
Because it's there.
Yuli Novak,
Yuli Novak, the former CEO of Breaking the Silence and the author of the new memoir, Who Do You Think You Are? Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
And also many thanks to you, Dov. It was a pleasure, as always.
Thank you.
And many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we'd like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. You too can support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribe to our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has something like 800 interviews. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And from us here in Tel Aviv, until then, goodbye.